talk with Steve for a little bit, and then I'm going to pass it over to you for some questions. So please be thinking of some good questions.
Yes.
And don't look, when I ask for questions, don't look at me like a deer in headlights, because none of us will bite. I know I don't. I don't know about you, but...
No, that's why I brought this in case I didn't put it back on.
Right, exactly.
I'm mostly wearing this, but I thought, no, I'll take it. My wife has some things like diabetes and stuff like that, so I've been super cold careful. So that's, if you come to my table later and I'm doing this,
I'm with you.
You'll know why.
I mean, I haven't looked at these, so I'm 100% with you. So.
Yeah.
Okay. A little safe and sorry. Absolutely. All right, well, let's get this shit started. The general question that every guest gets asked, and I want to start out with is how did you get started? What drew your interest into puppetry?
I was only ever interested in what Jim Henson was doing puppet-wise. There's lots of different kinds of puppets.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many different kinds. But that's what drew me to puppetry, was Jim's work in particular. If he'd been doing marionettes, I probably would have done it. My parents bought me these marionettes when I was about 6 years old. I spent all my time asking my parents to untangle them. So I learned quickly I didn't want to do that. And I always liked the idea of puppets, the hand puppets, because I felt connected to the character I was doing. My hands are there. It's like a part of it. It's part of you. And I think in a way that's what drew me to it. I would see Jim's work and his group on Sesame Street when I was 10 years old. And I just loved those characters. And I was a little old for what they were teaching on Sesame Street, but I watched the show every day just to see the Muppets. And I really, what I know now that I didn't think of then is that when you see the Muppets, at least in those days, you were seeing this right past the puppet and into the person behind the puppet. They really are identified by that person who performs them. Less than they used to be, but especially in those days. And that's what really drew me to it. And I just thought, God, it was like so much fun. And, you knew Jim if you knew Ernie, or Kermit. I mean, it was such a part of it.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're 18 years old living in Atlanta, you go to a puppetry festival.
That's right.
And you meet Carol Spivey.
I did. Carol was the guest at this spinning, just to say. And I went because I wanted to meet somebody who worked for the Muppets. It wasn't even in my mind that I would end up getting a 4-year job out of this. Worked out pretty well. But yes, so I met him there. He and his wife were there, and he was the Muppet guy, and I never thought I would get from him. And about 4 months later, Carol, we exchanged addresses, but I still never thought I'd hear from him again. And he got in touch with me and said Jim was looking for new people at that time for Sesame Street. But I ended up not working at Sesame Street after meeting Jim. I went straight to work on the Muppet Show. Which was best for me because that's where Jim's focus was at that point, was on that new thing he was doing called the Muppet Show. And all of his main puppeteers were there. So I never actually worked on Sesame Street until after Jim died.
Right.
Yeah.
So how crazy is it going from your 18 years young and to the Muppet Show? 4 months later,
it was insane. I was a very unsophisticated 18-year-old, and the Muppet Show was shot in London. I had never traveled out of the country. I hardly traveled at all. I felt Atlanta, and I really felt like I just got picked up by the scruff of the neck and dropped in another country. I didn't know anybody. I met Jim and I met Frank Oz. If you guys know who Frank Oz is. But they were busy making a show. They didn't have time to hang out with this 13-year-old kid. So I knew them, but they were kind of good. So I was really a fish out of water. Everyone was so much older than me, even though a lot of the people actually weren't. It took a while.
Did anyone take you under your wing to kind of show you the ropes of how do they do? Again, puppets and Muppets are different in every aspect. And so, is there something that's how would you think here?
Yeah. Well, everybody can do it. I always said that I was very fortunate, as I was saying, other than going straight to Sesame Street at that point, to work on the thing that Jim was focused on most. And by doing that and being around his sort of core group of 5 or 6 puppeteers, performers, I feel like I got the chance to learn something a little different from each of them, because they all had their own approaches, they all had their own styles, they all had their own strengths. And it was really a lucky thing for me to watch and observe these different people, because my first job with the Muppets essentially was to double for those people. Now, they always did the voices.
Right.
But if let's say, Frank Oz did Fozzie Bear and Miss Piggy. And if they're both in the same scene, he can only do one at a time. So I might do Miss Piggy while he's doing Fozzie. And then he would do the close-ups, but I would have to, I don't know why it clicked to me, but the important thing for me was to try as best I could to make it indistinguishable between Frank's performance and what I was doing to cover him, so that it was seamless when people watched the show. And so it was a real opportunity to learn all those different styles and ways of doing things.
So tell us the origin of Rizzo the Rat.
Well, let's see. We were doing a Muppet Show, and I don't know whether everybody's seen the Muppet Show, depending on your age and your experience. The Muppet Show had this backstage area where Kermit held the desk and all the guest stars would go through, and all this mayhem going on. In the background of all those shots was just anonymous puppets doing all kinds of things. And none of that was scripted or decided. Jim would just say, to a guy like me who just came in last week, he'd say, okay, grab a puppet and get in the background and just do whatever you want to do. He didn't give you any instructions. And it was really your chance to learn, as long as it was something that was broadcastable. I mean, you couldn't do something.
Right.
but you could just do this silly thing. And he really encouraged us to try to take upstage, take the attention off of what they were doing. So we got to be goofy and act silly in the background, and we never got corrected. And one day, they had a bunch of puppets that were in storage, and I found this terrible, really badly made rat puppet that was like a prop almost on a stick. And I just had this rat come in and stand next to Kermit while Kermit they were doing a serious scene with Kermit, Fozzie, and Piggy, and all these characters. And this little rat just stood there next to Kermit the whole time. And Kermit would say something, and this little rat would he'd nod, or he'd shake his head no, and he'd look at the other, just upstage it, right next to Kermit. So the scene ended, Jim didn't crack a smile, he did the whole scene the way he should, and he turned to me and just broke up laughing. And he said, "Where did you get that terrible puppet?" And I said, "It was one of yours. It was, And he said, right then he looked at me, he said, "We're going to make that rat a star." So he did. He had me redesign the puppet, and I rebuilt. Again, I like putting my hands inside the puppet. So this is a puppet that was on a stick about this long. So if you imagine, I'll set this down for a minute. If you're holding a puppet on a 3-foot-long stick, if you want the puppet to move like a little bit, it's really hard to do, because everything you do small down here, it does really big up here. So I wanted to figure out a way, it's this little tiny thing. So we rebuilt Rizzo so that my hand could go inside of the body, not in the head, it was too small, but in the body. And that's the way Rizzo remained for all the years I was doing it.
Fascinating. It's such an interesting character here. Your choice of toys for it, I love Rizzo's one of my favorite characters. He's great.
Well, he's my favorite character that I ever did. He came right out of me. But it took me a long time to decide how to do that character, who he was going to be, and all that sort of thing. Again, I'm this 18-year-old from Atlanta. I've never been to New York, and I don't know how to do a New York accent, a bad one. And I had Richard Hunt and Jerry Nelson, two of Jim's real famous core people, who were both from New York, and were really strong performers, whereas I wasn't that good at that point. And Rizzo was supposed to be the leader of the rats, And there's no, I just couldn't hold a candle next to these other two guys who were so good at it, So I probably learned a lot of what became Rizzo from those two people, because they were doing these rats who were talking like that. I couldn't do that, not then,
Right.
I couldn't do it at all.
So, you did the show for a while, and then, of course, Jim makes the movies. And
Right.
You're along with the movies,
Yeah.
and I know we'll go back and forth and cover it.
Sure.
But I want to do a little progression, because I'm so interested in just the different style of puppets. You move from that, then the Dark Crystal, which is a whole kind of a different animal.
Yeah.
And so, how do you approach and tackle that thing? I mean, that's
it was quite a challenge, and real state-of-the-art thing at the time. Nobody had done a movie like that was all puppets and with these kind of rubbery, but living, breathing kind of creatures. The Muppets are kind of more abstract and zany and silly. And that was really the thing. We all toned down the movement of the characters to try, it looks a little crude these days, frankly, but at the time, we were really trying to make them look like they were alive. More so than with the Muppets. The Muppets seem alive too, but you know the difference. It's
Absolutely.
more cartoony. So we would do things like, I would go, we shot this in England, so I would go to like a little outdoor restaurant somewhere, and I would sit across the street from where other people were walking, and I would put my hand up, and I would say, okay, well, the Muppets walk like this, they walk like this. No person really walks like that, but that's how the Muppets walk. But how does a person really walk? So we would study the movement of these people, and rather than, and then try to make that work into this physical, into your arm inside of a puppet. So we went from doing this to really doing that, because that's about all people do when they walk. It's almost no movement at all, and on camera, even that's big. So we really just, everything got small. And I know after Dark Crystal, I walked away with that in my mind and started kind of applying it back to the Muppets a little bit. And the Muppets became more, I'm not the only one who did that, but they became more kind of organic, living, breathing things too, from that experience.
Dark Crystal is still amazing, and so it's so. I know that it had been such a difference in life, even with cell movement and stuff for it. What I'm really curious about is that having worked with Jim Henson, doing the Muppets and Dark Crystal, what was his directing style like?
Well, that's a great question. Jim was the kind of person, and this is why it was so great to work with him. Because I always say I worked with him, I didn't work for him.
Right.
Although I worked for him. But he encouraged everybody to contribute. And he almost never, he told us what to do, but he didn't tell us how to do it. He almost never told you how to do something. We were all following the same direction, the same vision. Dark Crystal had a story, Labyrinth, things like that. But he wouldn't tell you, he wouldn't micromanage your performance. He really let you do what you wanted to do, almost all the time. And that meant that he was overseeing the whole thing. But I once had a conversation with Jim where he said, I forgot the origin of the conversation, but his comment was, when we do these numbers, we do these pieces we do like on the Muppet Show, he said, the finished product is only about 60% of what I saw in my head when we received it. And I remember thinking, it must be so frustrating. To have the other 40% of what Jim Henson was seeing for this never happened. But that's because he let everybody contribute. And so it was so great for everybody else. And he was fine with it. He really wanted it to be a collaborative group thing. And a lot of directors aren't like that. A lot of directors have their vision, you do it like this, and if you don't do it that way, you do 50 takes until you get what they want. Which is typical. But with Jim, it was much more laid back and easy to be a part of something, to be able to play something.
Is that something you carry over with your own style?
Well, I try. I certainly try, and I always did try. I'm a real sucker for camaraderie. That's my thing. I love working with a group of people on whatever it might be, whether it's a film project or whether it's yard work. Whatever it is. I like having a core little group of people, and we all have the same direction we're headed. And that can also be a weakness sometimes if you find out that they're not headed the same way you are. But I love that, and that's the way Jim was. He really wanted. He won the Emmy right in 1978. The Muppet Show won for Best Comedy Variety Show, which is a big award for the Emmys, and he was thrilled. But his speech was essentially to say, I couldn't have done this without all these other people. He almost took no credit for what he, brought to the whole thing.
Amazing.
And rare.
Really,
rare.
Absolutely. Especially in terms of a lot of media. It is a group effort.
It always is.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've done a lot of projects, but one of the things that I got tickled when I got chosen to do your panel, one of my favorite pieces that shows that came out when I was a kid was The Christmas Story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
from 86, so it's a while back. I don't know if anyone has seen it.
You may not have.
I think it's still, it may be
Yeah.
available streaming now, but it's almost Toy Story before Toy Story.
Yes.
And it's,
We noticed that too.
yeah, it's almost Toy Story before Toy Story. When I first saw Toy Story, I was like, this is the Christmas story. It is it's a story about toys at Christmas time, and one of the main toys wants to relive being that first toy, that beloved toy.
Right, right.
But the problem is if you get seen out of place, you're frozen forever.
Right.
So it's got this really weird Twilight Zone kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it was anti-Freddy. I was terrified of it. So I'm like, I gotta make sure my toys don't.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be frozen forever. But
Yeah.
like you, a little.
Well, it was a cat toy.
Cat toy.
He wasn't even really a toy. This poor little mouse was like a cat toy.
Right.
Who got thrown in with the toys, but he really wasn't legitimate.
Right. It's just, but
Yeah, this problem, he wasn't really.
So can you tell us about working on that project?
A little bit.
I know it was a while back.
Yeah. Well, we shot in Toronto, and it was during the production of Fraggle Rock, which is another game. And we sort of finished a season of Fraggle Rock and went off to do, or maybe a few shows, and it was Christmas time, so we did it Christmas time. And it was mostly the same team of performers on Christmas Toy as well. And it was just cool because these were all these, most of our projects, the characters stylistically kind of have a certain look to them, but these were all different. Everyone was a toy. There was I can't remember. There was a stuffed tiger named, God, the name's
Yeah.
I'm getting old. Oh, that's terrible. But you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
So he was like a stuffed.
His name was Rugby.
Thank you.
There we
Thank you.
go. Somebody's best friend could go on.
But so he was much like a stuffed plush toy. And I think one of the things he kept saying was he talked about how plush he was, this
Right.
kind of attitude. And he would always bat the little catnip mess around, and the mouse was kind of like dejected because he didn't fit in, I recall. And anyway, great fun. I went into that project from a personal standpoint, trying to figure out, because I was always trying to think, I always wanted to try not to do the same character voice twice. And that's pretty hard, because I'm not really a voice person. Puppeteer, but voices came second. And if you know Fraggle Rock, you'll know Wimbley Fraggle, this character I did on there. Basically, Mew is Wimbley with a falsetto. It went from Wimbley Fraggle up to... I can't even do that.
Well, 30 plus years
That was a long time.
How familiar
That was a long
you're
time.
for that?
I had more like fluid in my body at that point. My throat would do that.
But it's so, that film is so, again, if you've not seen it, it's great, something to find for next Christmas, but
Yeah.
to spoil it, a 30-year, 35-year project, but, Mew is found out of place and he's frozen. And then
Yes.
it's the heart of the story.
Yes.
It's such an amazing and sweet story. And but again, it's Toy Story before Toy Story with the Twas on Edge on it, but it's wonderful. I mean, so
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank
it's
you for
funny
that.
because
That's great.
We've spent some time with the Pixar folks over the years, and I think they sort of know that too.
They're hiding all the Toy Story stuff when you guys show up.
Exactly. All those guys are huge Muppet fans. And you'll see these days, Frank Oz and Dave Gold's, two of the main puppeteers, will oftentimes do voices in Pixar films. I've never done it, but they'll come in. Pete Docter is one of the Pixar directors, one of the nicest guys on the planet. And he'll always pull David Franklin because they, come in and do a character, like a cameo.
Right.
The voices.
That's absolutely wonderful. Before I pass you on to our wonderful audience,
Yes.
I want to talk about the Kermit.
Kaven.
Yeah.
Yes. Does anybody know what this is? No.
Well, here's
Okay,
I saw
well,
it.
now's my chance.
It's great. Please, it's wonderful.
Kaven is my post-Muppet thing that I'm doing. I started doing this about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And I wanted to find something mostly just to keep doing something with a character. And my favorite thing to do always with characters, Kermit with all of them, was the non-scripted things that we did, like if we went on the Today Show or the Tonight Show or one of those, and those were never scripted. And so we're just ad-libbing and you're in character and the character's talking to the host or whoever. So basically this character that I'm doing now, it's an original thing I did called Wheddon the IT Guy. And Wheddon is, the IT stands for Internet Troll. So that means he hacks the internet, and he lives in a cave, and he's a legitimate physical creature that's a troll, but he also is an internet troll. And the point of this hour-long or so show we do every month, the last Friday night of every month on YouTube, is that you or anybody can, I mean adults, kids, it's all clean enough for kids, you can call in and talk to Wheddon. And what Wheddon wants to know is, what's your most miserable experiences? Because he's a miserable guy. He's like Oscar the Grouch on steroids. And he wants to talk about your misery. And I started out doing this thing where Wheddon was kind of, he would pick on the caller a little bit. And I soon realized that nobody was ever going to call back again. So I thought, well, okay, what are we going to do? So now Wheddon basically, whatever you call him, whatever you're miserable about, he'll take your side. He'll say, oh, that is terrible. That's the worst thing you've ever, oh, I hate it when that happens. And he gangs up on the person you're having a problem with. But we have a great time. It's all improvised, except in the middle of each show, we do these 2 to sometimes 6 minute, really complicated production numbers that I do all the music for, and it's one puppet, it's only Wheddon, he plays all the parts, we shoot everything like on green screen, and it's him having conversations. We did one last month, which was Spider Troll, which is him as Spider-Man, swinging through the city. It's just parodies, silly parodies. This month, the one coming up at the end of this month is a takeoff on Law and Order SVU called Law and Odor. Stinky Victims Unit. So, next Friday, yeah. So, the best, I'd love it if you guys would watch this thing sometime. Or call in. I mean, the hard part, I'm realizing something. Back when I was a kid, and when many of us were kids, you watched your TV show when it was on because that's when you saw it. These days, nobody ever watches when something's actually being broadcast. They watch it later. So if you're trying to do a call-in show, you might not have any callers. We have our regulars who call in all the time, and they're almost cast members now. But it's always good to get fresh callers, and just call in and tell them, well, you're miserable, And it's all good-hearted and fun, and we have a great time.
And you've had wonderful special guests on. And
We did. Yeah, we did a few, picked up a few celebrity interviews that Wheddon did with people at Comic-Cons, like Lou Ferrigno and Brett Iwan, who does Mickey Mouse's voice. We had a great time with him. One guy I've done like 3 things with is, do you guys know Brian O'Halloran?
it's
from
right
Clerks? Terrific guy. We've done 2 or 3 things together. And during COVID, we did anybody know a movie called Heat with Al Pacino and De Niro? One of my favorite movies of all time. So we did Wheddon as Al Pacino and Brian as Robert De Niro. And we shot it in 2 different places. And we called it iHeat. And it's 2 iPhones facing each other. And it was during the time when they were blowing up and like catching on fire. So Wheddon's phone is getting hotter and hotter and hotter and turning red while they're having this conversation. And it's all kind of crazy stuff. So I've had a great time doing those. And it's all me, really. I've got one other production person. And my wife helps me with the puppeteering. So it's great fun.
Got me excited about one. What is the process like of creating a new character like that for you?
Well, it's always different, I think. Well, in my case with Wheddon, I built the puppet, which is rare. I never built puppets really within Muppets, although I had built a few before that. And I hadn't built a puppet in probably 30 years, and I didn't know whether I could build a good puppet.
He looks great, though.
He's a good puppet. It turned out well, but it could have just as easily not. But it cost a lot to get a puppet built. So I thought, well, let's see if I can build this. So I built Wheddon from the inside out, and the whole time I'm building the puppet, like sewing the stitches and making the costumes and putting the fur on, I'm talking in the character. So as you're building the character, you're becoming the character, which is kind of cool. A lot of puppeteers do that. A lot of people who build puppets and perform them really know their character literally from the inside out. So that was kind of cool to get back into that. And then I wanted him to be this grouchy little guy. If you guys know who Rizzo the Rat is, Rizzo's this character that I did for a long, long time. We talked about that. And I would say that Wheddon is kind of an extension of where I might have left off with Rizzo. He's a little bit grouchier and a little bit more gruff, but really he's kind of Rizzo. Different voice, slightly, but he's a little bit New Yorky. So it's something I was already comfortable with. He's just great fun, and most of the material for that show is nothing we write, except those mid-show pieces. It's all improvised, so a lot of it just comes off of whatever. Some of the shows are terrible, and you get this boring call and you can't get anything out of it, and then you'll have a brilliant thing come in that you can play off of. But it's the internet.
Right.
People are going to watch it, or they're not going to watch it. And I can just afford to experiment and play.
Cave in and YouTube, subscribe, watch it every last Friday of every month.
Last Friday every month at 10 p.m. ET.
I've binged a bunch of them and they're great.
Oh, thank you.
Really,
thank
really,
you.
really funny. Maybe next month I'll call it. We'll see.
Yeah, please do.
So.
Please do. You hear how desperate I am.
So be interesting so we can have something to play off of.
If you guys have time, if you're here today or in the next few days, come by wherever I'm located. I can't figure out that other building.
That building's crazy.
It's insane. But I've got little cards that have the information about the show, which I'd be happy just to give to you, and you can check it out.
Well, how about we turn it over to the audience? Ask
Yes,
questions?
yes, absolutely.
So raise your hand, you got a question. We got one in the back already.
Yay!
I'm so glad you are here.
Thank you.
But I saw an interview with Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and they were talking about how Ralph is totally a Muppet who's out doing his thing, but sometimes somebody had to operate his mouth, and sometimes somebody had to operate his hands.
Yeah.
And in the interview, they said, well, if we want it to look right, Stevie does it. Were they talking about you?
Oh, that for Rolf, you said? Yeah, they were talking about me.
So did you get to play piano with Rolf and Liberace?
I did. Oh, you just brought up a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously I wasn't really playing the piano because Rolf only has 3 fingers. I'm a really bad piano player. I'm not good at it. If you brought a piano here and said play something, I probably didn't play anything. If you see Cave In, you'll hear all this music. I do all that, but it's one note at a time. You can do all that on your computer these days. I understand music, but I can't play well. So doing Rolf's hands on the piano is a great job for somebody who'd love to be able to play well, but who can't. Because I know the accurate places on the keyboard and the notes, and I can hear all that. But you've got this incredible piano player who's already pre-recorded it for you. So you get to look like you're playing it. I love that. And that's why Jim always had me do it, because I would really torture over learning every single note of these tracks. So by the time I was doing that, it looked quite good most of the time.
Did that come from you having to, when you were doubling for people, do you have to make sure you get the puppet right, saying the same thing?
Well, it came from that. Also, all throughout my childhood, I always tried to learn to play the piano. I was always drawn to that. I just was never very good. I played in these high school rock bands and things like that. So when we did Liberace plays a duet on the same piano, right, with Rolf.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, and it's more amazing because it was a real piano. So if I actually hit those keys, it would have just been garbage, and it would have been. And at that point, there's a microphone right there, so it recorded all the terrible stuff I was playing. So we had a guy named Derek Scott, who was one of the music directors on The Muppet Show, sitting right here at another grand piano, playing all of Rolf's parts, which I had to mime, and Liberace was playing real things on the real piano. But here's the thing, I couldn't not hit the keys, because it wouldn't have looked like Rolf was playing if I didn't actually touch the keys. So I had to make Rolf look like he was playing this big dynamic music, but just barely hitting the keys enough for them to move, but not make the hammer strike the. It was a nightmare. Because then Liberace would play something, and I had to pretend Rolf was playing something. So anyway, that was a tough one.
Wow. Next question, over here.
Do you have a suggestion for anybody that's trying to get into puppetry?
Yeah, turn back now. No, it's hard these days. I mean, I always, when people ask me that, and I always say, figure out what you really mean by that. Because if what you think is you want to get a job with the Muppets or with Sesame Street, that's different than just saying you want to be a puppeteer. As I said, there's all different styles of puppets, there's Muppet styles of puppetry, there's all kind of ways to do that. It might not include being a part of something like the Muppets. I was literally, it just fell into place. I was in the right place at the right time. There was less demand, there were less people involved with the Muppets at that point. And so I was able to, Jim was looking for one person and I turned out to be that person. He wasn't auditioning people, it wasn't like I went to a big audition where there were 50 people and I got chosen. I just got recommended by Carol Spinney, like we said, and it worked out.
Spinney was like, I know a guy.
It really was a lot like that. So the best way, if Muppet-style puppetry is what you want to learn, there are two things. The best way to learn, this goes back to the camaraderie part, is find somebody else who enjoys it, who will do it along with you. And you don't have to do this, but if you're interested in television style puppetry, you really need to work on it with a camera and a monitor, because it's very different than working in front of a mirror. It's completely different than doing live puppet theater, where you might be looking up at the puppet while you do it. You know, that perspective. The reason we always use a monitor with a camera connected to it is so that we can see exactly what the audience is going to see, and that's super important. You know, you'll notice on all the Muppet characters, with a couple of exceptions, but most of them, their eyes are, they're all these different colors and shapes and sizes, but their eyes are white and their pupils are black. So you have this absolute contrast between stark black and stark white and among all this other color. And the eyes, the two pupils, are focused so that when that character looks at another character or straight in the camera at you, it's really making eye contact with you like a person does, like when you talk to an actual person. And that is engaging with those characters. So one of the first things you have to learn with that style of puppetry is this eye focus thing, where you're learning, you know, it's almost like muscle memory, where you get in front of a camera and you just do this, and you try to, and you missed it. So you find that where those eyes are really looking, and you concentrate on the mouth movement and everything, so that it, really what it becomes for me, what I always felt, is that when you watch your character on the screen, you need to feel that that character is talking to you. And if you feel that, then you're doing a character that the audience is going to accept as well. And that takes a long time. It's really hard if you've never done it. It's very easy, right in the middle of a scene, if you're doing, you know, whatever you're doing, you say your line and it looks perfect, and then your puppet dies for a while you know, it happens all the time, even with some real professionals, you know. So it's really keeping that character alive and conscious all the time. You know, easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I'm getting tired
Yeah.
there.
Let's look at it. Got it. There we go.
Along the line of making eye contact,
Yeah.
we hear a lot of stories of people who work with Muppets, like the Cuban guest stars,
Right.
about how they forget that there's a person under there and they actually talk to the character. How often did that happen with you, and any interesting stories?
It mostly, I think because of the fact that those are actors as well, they can, well, first of all, we talk about the eye focus on the characters, but oftentimes if I'm playing a character that would be looking into, like playing toward a camera, it's like a presentation out to you guys, and the puppet's going to look at a person over here, I probably would cheat the eye line. It probably wouldn't come all the way around to that actual person. It'd be like a partial. So, because it seems to help the look of the characters when you just keep both eyes in. You know, you find those eye lines, but from a profile, it may not really be looking at that actor. And so that to me would be really hard to deal with. You know, if you're an actor who's used to playing opposite a human being, where you're looking in that person's eyes all the time, and suddenly you've got this character that's not really looking at you. You know, it looks right on camera, but it doesn't look right in the room. So it's hard. Once in a while, it's less likely that this would happen, but a guest star would keep looking past the puppet to me. I've had that happen a few times, where I'm like down on the floor and they're up here and they're looking beyond at me, and I'm mostly not looking up at them. I glance up once in a while, but you know. So they cope different ways. You know. But I think they do forget. I think the characters become alive for them, and they just play as they would with any other actor.
And also, a lot of times, I mean, those celebrities are like us. We grew up with them on that. So it's starstruck. I mean, that's absolutely in a way.
It does happen sometimes. We did this Lady Gaga Christmas special a few years ago, she's terrific. It was a very weird thing for us to be on, for the Muppets to be on. Because we're trying to, she's like singing her songs, which, you know, it's great to hear her sing her songs. But the Muppets are there. It's like, it was odd. But she did it, and they cut this down. We probably talked for an hour, where she was going to do this segment where she was talking to Kermit about and it led into a song about being lonely. But it also kind of turned into this mini therapy session. And it was one of those times, but Steve wasn't there. I mean, I'm off camera anyway. And she just had this long conversation with Kermit about life and everything. It was really amazing, you know. And she got lost in Kermit, and Kermit was responding.
I Okay, well, that's something maybe we all could ask if we
Yeah.
have a therapy session with Kermit. Because he always gets great advice most of the time. It's just like, oh, you guys, please pretty good at this. Other questions? Over here.
A good Kermit. Yes. Yes.
Question in the back there.
What was it like working on Fraggle Rock?
Fraggle was fantastic. I said Rizzo was my favorite character I ever did. Fraggle was by far the favorite project of mine that I was ever a part of all the stuff. I was like 22 or 23 years old, and I'd been with Jim's company for about 5 years. And I would say the characters on that show really were the, I mean, I'd already done Rizzo, but Rizzo wasn't, he was like, you know, an unformed fetus or something. He didn't exist. And suddenly I was given Wimbley, Fraggle, and Sprocket on there, and it was a chance for me to really develop the characters to something I had no experience at. And I had enormous freedom with that character. So much fun. It was a great puppet built by maybe the top puppet builder on the planet, this lady named Raleigh Crusoe, who's been in the Muppets forever, longer than I was there. And just so much fun. And my favorite scenes with Wimbley was when he actually had no dialogue. He was in the scene, he was like behind two other characters who had a lot to say. But Wimbley had nothing to say, so Wimbley would just like listen and think about it, and he was reacting. I love that stuff. And you know, and every time there was a little gap in the sound, Wimbley would make a noise like, oh wow, oh yeah, that's true, yeah. Loved it. It was so much fun.
So for that, I mean, of course you've done a lot of this, but you already got the job. So like when there's new characters or new projects like that, are they like, hey, Steve, I think you'll be a good fit for this? Or,
Well, it's
or,
funny that you should say that.
Or, okay.
With Fraggle, Jim and Jerry Jewell, who's the Muppet head writer forever, one of Jim's original people who worked with him, they held this sort of fake audition where they brought 5 or 6 of us into a room. And like I tried doing Gobo, and then I tried Uber, and you know somebody else tried Wimbley. But Jerry later admitted to us that they already knew who was going to do what character. But they went through this process of letting us all try each character. It was kind of weird. So in that case, they had really already cast us. And Wimbley was perfect for me because I was this young guy who had this sort of hummingbird metabolism, and that's what Wimbley was. You know, very hyper, and couldn't make any decisions. And that's what Wimbley was. He could never make decisions. You know, he was always caught in the middle of things, trying to decide. Never wanted to make anybody angry. You know. So that was my therapy. It was Wimbley.
That was helping out all.
Exactly.
Question right here, Dr. Strange.
Worst or least favorite character you've ever done?
Oh my goodness, let's see. Least favorite. I had to do this weird character on, he's not really my least favorite now, but at the time it was really hard. This character on a show called Muppets Tonight, and his name was Mr. Poodle Pants. Now, nobody will have any idea who that was. But it was kind of an Ed Wynn voice, if anybody knows who Ed Wynn was. And he kind of talked like this all the time. But this character really came out of one of our writers, a guy named Kirk Thatcher, who's also a director. And Kirk did this character incredibly well, only Kirk's not a puppeteer. So it was like, okay, well, so Steve has to do it. But then I've got this guy sitting over here who is the character, and I'm trying to be even close to as good as Kirk was at this thing that came out of his childhood or something. So that was really hard. I got through it. The worst ones sometimes are the heavy ones. They can kill you. We did this great fun show, which no one's ever seen, called The Animal Show, with Stinky and Jake. It was a Fox kids show for a while. It was on for a short time, but we had such a great time. We had all this incredible footage from, it's gone out of my head. I think it was Anglia Television in England. Anyway, they had all this nature footage, tons of it, and we could use any of what we wanted, of any animal. So it was Stinky and Jake. Jake was this giant polar bear that I did. Stinky was a little skunk down by dead gulls. And then they would cut to this footage. And it would be about an aardvark, and an aardvark puppet would be there talking about its family. So it was this educational kind of thing. Jake was a really hard puppet to do because he was massive and huge and taller than all the other characters. And the way he was built, because he was so big, I had to do my hand like that the whole time. Which immediately, the minute you do that, this starts to hurt. And then you're talking. And he had this voice that I'm not going to try to do, which was so gruff and so deep that, you know, I was almost like tasting blood in my throat. But it was horrible. It was horrible. And I loved doing it, but it was horrible. So when you get those characters that weigh a ton, that can kill you.
And one question behind Dr. Strange there.
So Muppets and puppets in general are all usually pretty family friendly and kid friendly and all that. What's your views on puppets that go in the opposite direction, kind of like how Brian did with the Happy Time Murders and like Crank Yankers and all that?
Well, you know, it's funny you should ask that because I really, after that came out and there was a lot of people who didn't like it, a lot of people who did. It's not my style of what I like to do. And I don't think Jim would have done it either. And for that reason, I was happy to see that it wasn't, you know, so much from the Jim Henson Company says Jim Henson, and that did not. So I thought that was a good choice on their part. They claimed that they wanted it. But I thought, well, how far do I go with Wheddon? When I do this Caven thing, you know, do I make it, because it's not really my style, but do I make it adult? I don't know. But then I thought kids are going to be watching it. And so I didn't do that. I think it's unfortunate when there's an expectation by parents that this is all going to be family friendly and child friendly, and then it turns out not to be. I think that happens sometimes. And then, you know, there are also parents who would take their kids to see that. I prefer not to do that performance. I think I have to, first of all, transparency, I never saw that film. But part of the reason I didn't see it is because of that. It just didn't interest me. And by the way, this is a ridiculous thing for Steve Whitemire to say in front of people, but I really don't watch puppets very much. I love performing puppets, probably more than anything, but I don't ever go watch other puppet things. It doesn't really draw me in. What draws me is doing the work. And frankly, Jim had a great admiration for other people's stuff, and he would watch it. But I think most of the Muppet performers probably don't watch a lot of other puppet shows. We love doing it because we love the performance and we love the characters. But I'm not drawn to go see other puppets very much. So, but just on that, yeah, it's just not. I don't know. To each his own. It's not my thing. You know, I'd rather. I can't say that. You know, stuff like that's out there. You know, but it just didn't. I'd always, and I can't say this about the film because I didn't see it, but it seems like a cheap way to get laughs. If I had Kermit here, right now, and he was talking to me, all of a sudden he started cursing, he'd probably laugh, but it's not Kermit. You wouldn't do it. So, that's not Ernie. It's not 80s guys. You know, you don't, it's just not.
It's not Ernie.
It's not the style of a lot of mentor.
We have a question over here.
I'd like to follow up on that one.
Yeah.
So when Jim was around, obviously the Muppet sensibility was whatever he did or allowed to have happen.
Yeah.
And Jim wasn't going to be around forever in any event.
Right.
But as time goes by, how does one kind of keep an idea of what, given just how much the range of the Muppets are, from you know SNL to the old dads to the Muppet Show, how does one keep that sensibility? What are the guidelines for what a Muppet sensibility is?
Well, the real answer to that is it's not really there right now, which is why I'm not there right now. I mean, that's the truth. The most important thing to me throughout all of my time after Jim passed away, up until the time I was no longer there, was to do exactly what you're saying. That is to keep that sensibility alive and keeps Jim's influence involved. But it's really hard to do in a big, giant corporation where the Muppets kind of became, I used to say they were like a palette of paints that were handed out for anybody to paint with. And they lost, I felt that they were beginning to lose their individuality. Because like I said earlier, when you see the Muppets, you're seeing the performer behind them. They start to lose, I think they start to lose their connection to a large degree, and it's unfortunate. It's the way a lot of franchises go, you know, that were small to begin with. So I don't know how you keep it in there. It's very hard. You'd have to have somebody at the level who has the authority to allow someone else to keep that alive. And I'm afraid it's not likely to happen. You know, so watch the rest live. I mean, I hate to say that, but you know, the sensibility is there, and it was almost like, you know, a lot of people say, you know, when the Big Bang happened, the universe started expanding, and someday it might contract. Well, that's kind of how it came up. You know, Jim had this Big Bang, and it's slowing down a little bit. But we have, you know, 60 years of stuff. But it's hard to keep it pure and not make it stale, you know. And you really do have to have some sort of a link back to Jim's way of doing things for that to continue, I think. It's hard to synthesize it. You know, it's a great marketing tool to say that that's what you're doing, but I'm not sure it's what's really happening. That's depressing. I didn't mean to be depressing.
Sadly, our time is almost done, so
Yeah.
we've got time for about one more
Ask me a
question.
better, I don't mean a better question, but I have your question.
I have a question over here.
So what is it like inheriting an already developed character and then watching a character you develop get inherited by somebody else?
Well, it's really hard on both counts. It was extremely difficult and scary and awesome to try to step into anything Jim had done, because Jim was so, of all the characters at that point in time when Jim passed away, people associated Jim and Kermit together. And really the only way I could have possibly even thought about trying to do it was that I had worked with Jim for 12 years. And I was there next to him a lot and around him for almost all the projects he was doing. And what really is, it's odd, the thing, and I've said this before, some of you may have heard it, but the thing that clued me into the beginning of understanding Jim and Kermit together after he passed away was remembering what his face looked like when he did Kermit. Because we make these extreme faces, you know, we're pushing this performance out through our hands, right? So, you know, we look ridiculous underneath. We're overacting with our faces to make this work up here. And Jim had a face that he made when he did Kermit. And as soon as I started, I mimicked that face. And Frank Oz said something interesting to me at that point. He said, and I sort of knew this instinctively anyway, he said, if you are going to do Kermit faithfully, first you have to act as Jim in that role. So, because that's what Kermit is. And so, to whatever extent I was able to do that, that was the only thing that helped me, was that I knew him. And I knew what parts of Kermit came from Jim, and what parts were maybe just Kermit, or the other parts that were just Jim, you know. And all those little mannerisms and little nuances that Kermit has in him, the things he says, the things he does, those were really specific. And yet I needed to build on that. The first thing we did was Christmas Carol. And suddenly it's Steve playing Jim, playing Kermit, playing Bob Cratchit. Is that like to the fourth power?
Yeah, very Inception.
Very weird. But your other question was watching other, yeah, it's really hard to watch the other characters get taken. My departure wasn't that much fun. And, you know, I'm still doing this, you know, so I'd love to have done one in the Fraggle Rock, you know, and, you know, but I'm still doing it.
Well, I'm sorry, I have to leave on such a
Yeah,
note.
no, that's okay. It's a good note.
Our time is short and limited.
Yeah.
Thank you for everybody for coming out. So give it up for Steve. Steve's going to be at the Bay Center. You can see him, get an autograph, talk to him.
Sure.
It'd be great. And when you leave here, would you pull out your phones, go to YouTube, and subscribe to the Cave In? We can get another 50 people for you right now.
Great. Listen, if you can't find it under Cave In, because there might be other things, look Wheddon the IT Guy.
Wheddon the IT
It'll
Guy.
pop up under the character.